This insane bleed build lets you rampage through groups of enemies and make easy work of the harder bosses in the game. Like a vampire, this build literally drains the enemies of their blood, making it one of the most broken builds that I played with in Assassin's Creed Shadows so far. The bleed affliction in itself already has to be the best affliction in the game. However, when built out and combined in a bleed specific build with the right set of gear, weapons, engravings and skills, Nawe becomes a damage dealing powerhouse. Apart from making it insanely easy to deal with enemies one by one with the katana, the Kusarigama provides Nawe with a bigger AoE, which makes it easier to deal with bigger groups of enemies. This enables you to switch between two playing styles by only switching weapons, making it a very fun build to play with. This build lets Nawe build up bleed affliction with every hit, tool and enemy kill, as every gear piece focuses on maximizing bleed. And if the bleed affliction isn't enough, the second focus of this build is an increase in damage output, and the increase of armor piercing damage when for example hitting multiple enemies or enemies that are vulnerable. So in order to make this build for yourself, you will need the following gear, weapons, trinket and engravings. To start off with this build, it is important to have weapons that deal bleed damage or increase the bleed affliction and have the right engravings on them. Important to note is that the engravings can always be added to the open engraving slots on the weapons, but for this build you will need the following specific legendary weapons due to their bleed buildup with every hit and legendary engravings. Starting off with the Katana. The Katana, the Bloodshade, has to be one of the best katanas in the game, which you can also get quite early on. And this Katana is the perfect main weapon for this build, as it not only has a great legendary engraving, being that bleed affliction buildup on enemies is not lost over time, but also that it does 18% of bleed buildup. This buildup will make sure that with every hit of the Katana, bleed buildup is added to the target. I also added another affliction engraving to make sure that affliction buildup is increased by 600% when hitting vulnerable enemies, which is something that you will do often due to the deflecting enemies' attacks and vaulting over them. And in order to get your hands on this weapon, you will need to go to this location on the map. Just off the coast beneath Amagasaki, you can find a ship that will include the katana within the legendary chest. As the secondary weapon, you want to get the Bloodletter, the legendary Kusarigama, again due to the bleed buildup per hit of the weapon of 18%, and the legendary engraving that bleed is immediately triggered on an entanglement, which easily can be done over and over again by doing heavy posture attacks and holding the heavy attack button. And while hitting multiple enemies is something you will do quite often with this weapon when spamming the heavy posture attack, for the second engraving I added the engraving which does increase the armor piercing damage when hitting multiple enemies by 72%, making this a very powerful weapon when fighting bigger groups of enemies. This legendary weapon can be found over here on the map at the Kashiwara Fort in the Iga region, as it will be the reward for opening the legendary chest after eliminating all the samurai daisho in the fort. Starting off with the gear. With the mask you can get a bit creative, however you have to make sure that it will not be a legendary gear piece, so purple or below, due to the enhancements of the trinket later on in the build. As can be seen, I went with the Onryo mask due to the increase of 10% overall damage, and apart from that I added the legendary engraving that lets you vault over enemies when sprinting, making them instantly vulnerable. And by the way, I found this mask in a random chest in a castle. And in order to get the legendary engraving though, you have to obtain the legendary Onimusha headband. And this one can be found over here on the map in the Yamato region at Koriyama Castle. Again, in order to open the legendary chest, make sure to deal with all the samurai daisho. And for the armor piece you want to get the No Masterstroke costume, especially due to the insane engraving that killing afflicted enemies will spread the affliction to other enemies, and due to the tool bleed buildup of 26% that enables you to even build up affliction from a distance by throwing a kunai or shuriken. To easily deal with the larger enemies or bosses, I also added the engraving that lets you build up affliction by 600% when hitting vulnerable enemies. And since you will be making enemies vulnerable continuously by dodging or deflecting attacks, or even by vaulting over them, the 600% increase of bleed buildup will take chunks off the bigger health bars of, for example, bosses. This legendary armor you will find together with the legendary engraving over here on the map in the key region in a chest within a small cave. And last but not least, the Trinket. To complete this build with some extra damage stats, I added the Kitsune's Revenge, which I found in a random chest in the cast. And as can be seen, this trinket focuses on an increase in critical damage and a heavy increase of vulnerable damage due to its own stats and the base engraving of plus 48% armor piercing on vulnerable enemies. And to bulk up on some extra damage output, I also added the legendary engraving that increases damage by 15% per non-legendary gear. So with the trinket, horse and mask being non-legendary, this will add another 45% of damage. To get your hands on this engraving for yourself, you will need to get the Oni's Fury trinket, which can be found in a chest at this exact location on the map, in the Izumi Satsu region. And there you go guys, with all the gear, weapons, engravings and stats combined, you will have a really strong and fun to play with build for Naoe in Assassin's Creed Shadows, that focuses on build bleed up and doing extreme damage. And in order to make this build even better or suitable to your playing style or liking, you can always play around with the skills and stats by spending your skill points smart. So that is it for today's video. If you enjoyed the content, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to not miss out on future build videos. Stay tuned.